We are live with the Onyx Path news this glorious April the 1st. Hello, welcome. Welcome. If you watched the Onyx Path news last week, I can only apologize for my conduct. And my behavior. You see, I had something of a break, something of a mental break on the camera. I realized that when I can't see my own beautiful face, my mind gets full of moths. And you know how it is when your head's full of moths. It's like the old saying goes, you've got moths in your head. And it can send you rather off kilter. And it did to me. So I apologize here and now, unreservedly, to anyone who watched that news and felt concerned or indeed offended by my behavior on camera. But to re-emphasize, I couldn't see myself and I couldn't see the moths, and that worried me a great deal. But it's April the 1st. April the 1st generally means some kind of fun April Fool's Day kind of prank. I've got no pranks for you. I've only got announcements. And the first of those announcements is that At the Gates, our upcoming new RPG in the Earthbane cycle, the World Below is in the Earthbane cycle, At the Gates is in the Earthbane cycle, was released last Wednesday, and it's already a silver seller on DriveThruRPG. That ain't bad going for something released on Wednesday. And as of time of recording, it's only Monday. We found great success with the Ashcan for the World Below. And we're going to no doubt be experimenting with this kind of preview version of a game in future, because we seem to be finding similar success with At the Gates. And if you're unfamiliar at all with At the Gates, please don't notify me, PC, when I receive something, are you? If you're unfamiliar at all with what At the Gates is about, I can fill you in, because I am one of the co-writers on this game by the fantastic Danielle Lozon, who's one of the most wonderful developers I've ever worked with. And it is a JRPG influenced tabletop role-playing game. If you are familiar with and affectionate toward Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy, let me think, what other examples spring to mind? Hell, there's a lot of Ghibli in there, I would say, as well. Hell, there's even a little bit of Persona, so, you know, going a bit modern. Octopath is Octopath Traveler, if you're familiar with that. I remember when I first played, and it isn't by no means heralded as the best version of a JRPG, or certainly not the best Final Fantasy, available on the Super Nintendo, the SNES, as I call it. That was Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. I remember playing that when I was something like 11 or 12 years old, and being utterly blown away. And when working on At the Gates, it just brought back so many memories, because I helped co-create the magic system in this game. And I remember thinking, I want this to feel a little like terms some of you are going to be very familiar with, materia, that kind of thing that is present in the Final Fantasy games. And I think we've really done it well. At the Gates is divided into various conflicting, in some cases collapsing, nation states. There's loads of different interesting peoples, a huge bevy of monstrosities that you can come up against as well as antagonists. There's so many adventures to be had. And what's more, it is written in the grand, sweeping fashion of JRPGs. So your characters, when they take actions, they are meaningful, they are explosive, and I think very exciting. Given the Ashcan only costs a few dollars, this is, if you're unfamiliar with an Ashcan, a preview version. In other words, it gives you the rules in a slimline fashion. It gives you example characters. It gives you a scenario. It introduces you to the setting. It basically gives you everything you need to get out and play and get a taste for the game. Now, it doesn't represent what the finished game is necessarily going to look like in all of its forms, but it's a very good indicator. So I strongly recommend picking up At the Gates in Ashcan form. And if you already have, please go on to DriveThruRPG right now while I'm talking and leave a rating for it. It won't take you 5 seconds to do, and it is massively appreciated if you are able to leave a rating, because it will draw more people to this preview, which means more people will sign up for the full game when we release it on a crowdfunding platform. So at the gates, we're all very proud of it, and we're hoping it does very well. And I can see we've actually got a lot of comments, live comments, and I see Awkward GM Corbin came in live. This may be the first time he's managed to tune in live. So Nicholas says, "Hi, Matthew, quick question. Will Onyx Path make an April Fool's product?" I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's April Fool's Day today. I've not said anything remotely funny. And I'm not really one for April Fools myself, my personal tastes. I don't mind the occasional joke, the occasional prank. In fact, I'm a big lover of comedy, but I often find people don't know the difference between a prank and just being mean. So I've lost my taste for April Fools. Now I think we've done it quite well at Onyx Path in times gone by, but will we release anything this year? We'll have to see. Louis Garcia says, will there be more games in the Earthbane cycle? I certainly hope so. It really depends on how the World Below does, how At the Gates does. We have ideas, of course, at Onyx Path. I've got quite a lot in my pitch document for the Earthbane cycle. So we'll have to see. Fantasy is always a tricky sell when you're a company that is most known for horror RPGs. You know, Onyx Path is quite tightly associated with World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness. And obviously we have certain games coming up that go against that grain, including The World Below, which, while fantasy does have horrific elements, it certainly has some World of Darkness influences. And we have At the Gates, which I would suggest is more exalted-like in its epic fantasy nature. But there are some audiences that we attract who only want their horror RPGs. So that means it's always a gamble. I often talk on the Onyx Path News about how when we come up with a brand new game or a source book for a game, we never quite know how it's going to land because, well, we don't go out and market research with all of our customers and say, do you want this kind of book? We just have to kind of go with our instincts, try and identify where the trends are going, what people are talking about on our communities, on Discord, on our forums, and so on. And yeah, in short, I would love to see more Earthbane cycle games. What that means is tell your friends about the At the Gates Ashcan. Tell your friends about the World Below on BackerKit, because you can still pre-order it through there. And I get updated every week. We're still getting more people backing that game via BackerKit, even though the initial crowdfunding has closed. Most of them are ordering it in PDF. Some are still ordering it in print. So if you haven't picked up a copy of the World Below yet, you can still do that over on BackerKit, and you will still get access to the full manuscript. But back to the point, At the Gates, if you back it now, if you pick up the Ashcan now, come back in 24, 48 hours on Drive-Thru RPG, leave a rating. The ratings help us so much. Reviews do too, but I know that's asking more out of your day. Some people are comfortable writing reviews, some aren't, but ratings cost you nothing. So I really can't emphasize enough how useful they are. Awkward GM Corbin says Chrono Trigger still blows me away even today. Yeah, I've got lots of JRPGs for the Super Nintendo. That was obviously the era I got into them in a major way. Obviously, with the PlayStation, I remember again being blown away by Final Fantasy VII. Love Final Fantasy VIII as well. I know that's not always the most popular one these days. 9 didn't grab me quite as much, but there's just been so many great Final Fantasy games, and it isn't just Final Fantasy, but it is a wonderful cultural touchstone because almost everyone knows what you're talking about when you're talking about Final Fantasy. So Awkward GM Corbin says, does the magic system of At the Gates and the World Below differ drastically? I would say that magic is where those games differ the most. I can see that same thing being the case for each Earthbane game, should we do more. I think magic is a very good way of evoking the nature of the setting and how various rules of magic change, if there indeed there are rules. So yeah, I know Corbin, you were talking about not having read or backed at the World Below. I strongly encourage you pick up in PDF version via BackerKit if you haven't already, and have a look. have a look. The core of the system, Story Path Ultra, is the same from the world below to Out the Gates. The magic system is what will differ most, but I guess tone as well. Tonally, they're two very different games. And let's see. Awkward GM Corbin says, I hope the new games do really well. So do I. John Burke says, a great team on this book, Out the Gates, because John was on it. Well worth your backing. Not just a fun and exciting game, but a brilliant setting to get involved in. John is quite correct. John was one of the writers on the setting chapter. I hope you don't mind my saying that, John. We don't always identify authors per section because sometimes that doesn't go well. But I think the setting is so strong in Out the Gates. The authors, including yourself, should really be applauded. What else did we have? Well, we also had The Hollow King. The Hollow King was released last Wednesday, and it's quite possible that it slipped under the radar because everyone's been excited about Out the Gates. Totally natural. As you are probably aware, we release a new Tasty Bit product. So that is a new slimline book, usually of things like antagonists, story hooks, sometimes map resources, VTT resources, ready-made characters, new archetypes, that kind of thing. The Hollow King is a tasty bit for Scion Dragon. I saw several people asking, will we get more releases for Scion Dragon? Well, here is one. And the Hollow King has story hooks in. It has a new map for you. So if you play via VTT, that's a wonderful resource. Hell, even if you don't play VTT, print it off, use it like that. And our Tasty Bits always have a dedicated audience. We would love to expand that audience. So if you don't pick up our Tasty Bits, have a look through some of the things we've released. We release a new Tasty Bit every single month, often for different games. This year, for instance, is the first year where we're doing They Came From Classified Tasty Bits. We're doing a new They Came From Classified one every quarter. And I already have those planned out. But previously, we have done them for all the different Scions. We've done them for the various Trinity games. We've done them for various They Came From games as well. So, yeah, do check them out. One of the Tasty Bits that I think people did sleep on a bit was for They Came From Camp Murder Lake, because that added 2 whole new archetypes to Camp Murder Lake in the form of the Queen Bee, and I'm going to kill myself now in embarrassment. Not really, because I wrote it and I can't remember the other archetype. But 2 new archetypes, so They Came From Camp Murder Lake. That's not a bad deal. Not a bad deal. But the Hollow King is a wonderful, beautiful product for Scion Dragon. Only costs a few dollars. You could pick up the Hollow King and At the Gates, and you wouldn't even be breaking a tenner. So do consider doing so. Now, if there are any other questions in the chat, this is longer than most Onyx Path newses go, but maybe because I've recovered a semblance of normality after last week's mania, I can explain things to you a little clearer. So for the next couple of minutes, if you have any questions about any of our game lines, maybe I can answer them right now. Maybe I can. Maybe now is your opportunity to ask a question, because right now all my colleagues are in the Monday meeting. I got back after a splendid Monday, a splendid Easter Monday with the family, and now I'm here talking to you about our recent releases. So if you have any questions for us, any at all, just post them in the chat. Here we go. Awkward GM Corbin asks, what Easter egg you put in a game has no one talked about that you wish they did? Well, if I wished people were talking about Easter eggs, they wouldn't be very good Easter eggs. I like people to pick up on Easter eggs and secretly think to themselves, well, I'm smart because I picked up on this. I'm not going to tell anyone else. Let's think. What Easter eggs have I put into games that I would love people to pick up on? It's a very good idea, very good question, given that it is the Easter season. There's so many of them in Beckett's Jihad diary that people still haven't picked up on. I'm really pleased with a lot of the content. I mean, that's going back to V20 now, but I still think Beckett's Jihad diary has a lot. We've got in Howls of Apocalypse for Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th anniversary edition. I feel Howls of Apocalypse and Icons of Rage, coming out after Apocalyptic Record, as they would as stretch goals of that book, have of course been rather overtaken by the fact Werewolf 5th edition came out around the same time. But in Howls of Apocalypse, there is a fairly, I would say, overt love letter to my fondness for the Naked Gun series. I tend to put a lot of characters in games that have variations on comedy characters and actors and so forth in a lot of games, and not to take the fangs, as it were, out of a game, but because I like when people can read these things and feel knowing about them. Much the same as the various Bloodlines references in a book like Beckett's Jihad Diary. We managed to get a few of them in, but at the time, we weren't allowed to make anything overtly related to Bloodlines, which was an interesting conundrum that we had to overcome. I know. One of my favorites is in Chicago by Night. There we go. We'll go back to Vampire. V5, Chicago by Night. For all I know, this has changed now because I know Renegade have changed various elements of Chicago and Cult of the Blood Gods. But in Chicago by Night, we have a character. I think one of the Thin Bloods is a seer character. And we have, I suppose it's not Chicago by Night. I think it might be Let the Streets Run Red. It's one of the books that references Maxwell. So I think it is Let the Streets Run Red. So the former Prince of Chicago. And one of the Thin Bloods is a seer who has foretold that Maxwell will see his city divided into 5 and he will be usurped by the Princess of the Underworld, or words to that effect. And this is sending Maxwell into a paranoid fit. Now, this is a reference, an Easter egg, blown wide open, chocolate everywhere. This is a reference to how in Vampire the Requiem, there's Prince Maxwell of Chicago as well. And his child is named Persephone. And Persephone, of course, is the princess or queen of the underworld. And via the course of the various Vampire the Requiem clan novels, she is steadily, not clan novels, but the Requiem novels, she is sort of undermining him and building her own power base. And there being 5 segments to Chicago as the 5 covenants of Requiem. So it's a Requiem reference in Masquerade, which I was fond of adding. As for any hints for an Easter egg location, I think one of the best places to hide an Easter egg if you're doing an Easter egg hunt, put it in the toilet cistern. No one will look there. Follow the sort of Michael Corleone trend of hiding your Easter eggs, your pistols, your whatever it is you're trying to hide behind a cistern or in a cistern. No one will look for it there. Any inspirations for the world below that weren't able to fit into the inspiration section? There isn't an inspiration section in the world below. There's a reason for that. I very much want the world below to stand on its own. However, I've had so many people now ask me for inspirations for the world below that I may have to revise that before layout. Let's see. The obvious inspirations for the world below are my fetish for vertical based horror and dystopia. So High Rise by J.G. Ballard. Quite recently, The Platform, which is a Spanish movie, if I recall, on Netflix. There would be things like Dante's Inferno, both the original story, of course, and we have the video game, which is a pretty good influence for it too. Dungeon Keeper, the video game. Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is a massive inspiration in terms of appearances, because I think a lot of the people think of the world below and they imagine really cramped, jagged corridors and no room to swing a cat, let alone a hemexi. But in the world below, some of these caverns are cavernous. They are huge tunnels with ceilings so high up that you can't see them. And the environments and the ecologies within each of them are so varied. So you've got these fungal caverns, these crystal peaks, these winding tunnels, these tunnels that are basically made up of the fossilized remnants of dead bugs. Webs, people living in the midst of the webs of long forgotten arachnida, but their webs have remained. The world below is a huge and varied environment. Yes, there's underground seas in the world below. So yeah. Anyway, point is, there's lots of inspiration. A lot of them come from video games and my love of Metroidvanias like Hollow Knight, Castlevania, Metroid, of course, itself. Ori and the Will of the Wisps, to choose another one. Ember Lilies, Blasphemous. A lot of these things come into games like Hollow Knight in bits and pieces, like the Temple of the Benevolent Earth. I very much had in my mind when writing that, the idea of the penitent one in Blasphemous and sort of going around with a big spiky helmet mask thing wrapped in barbed wire. Because they are Templars, they are religious fanatics, some of them, and they're one of the playable factions or dogmas in the world below. But yeah, anyway, lots of inspirations there, and of course the Temple of the Benevolent Earth, very appropriate for Easter, of course. Anyway, I see my viewer numbers dwindling because they're not used to the Onyx Path news going on this long. So I'm going to bid you all adieu, and I will see you all next week for another exciting episode of the news. Speak to you again then.